June 6, 2024, Atlanta, Georgia. A community rocked by shock. 2 lives, young, full of promise, ripped away. Ava and Aria Hale. 18 years old. Twins. Their bodies found abandoned, discarded, behind the church that once called them its own. Behind its outreach van. Behind its walls of faith. 2 granddaughters, raised under the watchful eye of their grandfather, Pastor Thomas Hale. A man who built his life and legacy on the very faith he would soon betray. But in those final, desperate moments, Ava and Aria left behind more than just their bodies. They left a chilling question behind. Who could do such a thing? And why?
Welcome to Shocking True Crime. Thanks to all our viewers and subscribers for your support. Stay with us for daily updates on the most shocking true crime stories. Don't forget to subscribe.
The evidence, carefully pieced together, told a story of manipulation and control. A family shattered by betrayal. A pastor, whose reputation was built on trust and faith, now exposed as the orchestrator of a crime too dark to comprehend. Pastor Hale was a figurehead of virtue. A beacon of morality in a fractured world. But behind the pulpit, behind the prayers, a different story was unfolding. His influence, once thought of as divinely guided, was a shield for something much darker. A shield that hid a twisted relationship between a grandfather and his own granddaughters, the twins he had helped raise since birth. Ava and Aria, 2 young women filled with hope, were slowly drawn into their grandfather's world, one that was controlled by scripture, twisted by power, and shrouded in secrets. They were his to protect, to guide. But over time, they became his victims. What would make a respected pastor do this? What could twist a man of faith into something unrecognizable? The answers lie hidden in the darkest corners of the church, in the hidden texts, in the private sermons that never made it to the pulpit. Pastor Thomas Hale wasn't just a man of faith, he was a predator cloaked in holiness, a man who used the Bible itself to justify his betrayal. Scripture was meant to uplift, to guide. But for Hale, it became a tool of manipulation, a means of control. And Ava and Aria were trapped. Trapped in a world they thought they understood, but were slowly learning was a lie. Behind the walls of that church, where the community gathered in faith, lies a story of betrayal, power, and a twisted interpretation of morality. It's a story of a man who used his position to shield the darkness inside him, a darkness that led to a betrayal so deep, it destroyed a family. The city of Atlanta was left to ask, how could this happen? And why? What drove Pastor Hale to use his position, his power, to manipulate 2 innocent lives? And what was the cost of that betrayal? For Ava and Aria, their last moments were a silent cry for help. But no one heard them until it was too late. Thomas Hale was not always a criminal. He was a pillar in the community, known for his charity work and fiery sermons. His church was a sanctuary for the lost, the broken. But beneath the surface, his desire for control festered. In the beginning, Thomas Hale was seen as a protector, someone who used his position to bring comfort to others. His wife, his children, and his community trusted him implicitly. He preached the importance of faith, of being a shepherd for those in need, and of standing strong in the face of adversity. But, like so many people in positions of power, the mantle of responsibility began to weigh heavily on him. Over time, it became clear that his desire to help others had become tangled with his own need for control. It wasn't enough to guide. He wanted to own. He built his church on trust, on the foundation of faith. But faith, too, can be twisted. Hale's sermons became more intense, more commanding. What had once been a message of love and compassion began to shift. He preached of discipline, of purity, and of righteousness, but the message wasn't the only thing that changed. His control over his family, and especially over his granddaughters, Ava and Aria, grew more pronounced. What had once been affection became possessiveness. His influence wasn't just spiritual anymore, it was all-encompassing. And over time, he made it clear that no one, not even his granddaughters, was beyond his reach. Hale was a man who used his position to make people feel small, to make them believe they could never be good enough on their own, that they always needed him. It wasn't just about preaching the word, it was about making people dependent on him, making them feel that they could never stand alone. His granddaughters, whom he had raised since they were children, were not exceptions to this growing need for control. For years, Hale had cultivated his image as a man of moral fortitude. But beneath that image, a darkness was taking root. The very faith that had made him a revered leader was the tool he would ultimately use to justify the unspeakable. As time wore on, the walls around his twisted version of holiness began to close in on the very people who trusted him the most. The question was never if his actions would come to light, but when. Ava and Arya were the kind of twins who seemed inseparable, not just by blood but by spirit. They were born just minutes apart but carried a bond that felt timeless. Bright, full of life, and with personalities that radiated warmth, they lit up every room they entered. Ava, with her infectious laugh, always had a way of making others feel comfortable, while Arya, the more quiet twin, had a sharp mind and a gentle touch. They dreamed of a future beyond the confines of their small town, eager to explore the world, make their mark, and live life on their own terms. Both girls had their hearts set on college, determined to pursue careers that would help others, Ava with aspirations in healthcare, and Arya dreaming of becoming a writer, a voice for the voiceless. Ava and Arya, 18 years old. Twins, full of promise, joy, and life. Raised by the pastor, they had always been the apple of his eye. Little did they know, their grandfather's love was not what it seemed. A childhood friend of Ava and Arya, now in their 20s, recalls, they were inseparable, always together. But after a while, you could see it. Ava started to pull away. She wasn't as open. Arya was still quiet, but she looked sadder. They used to talk about their dreams, about college. But then, it was like they didn't have the energy to talk about anything anymore. Behind closed doors, their world was darker than anyone could have imagined. The pastor's protection was not out of love, it was control. Pastor Hale didn't just preach the word, he weaponized it. Scripture, used to save souls, became a tool to control his granddaughters. He twisted the story of Lot, claiming it was divine will, a justification for abuse. The story of Lot and his daughters, a tragic tale from the Bible, was the cornerstone of his manipulation. Hale used the narrative of Lot, where his daughters, in a desperate act, resorted to immoral behavior in the name of survival, as an excuse to convince Ava and Arya that what they were experiencing was not just permissible, it was ordained by God. He told them time and again that even Lot's family had sinned but were still forgiven because their actions were part of God's plan. Even Lot's daughters made mistakes. God used their weakness for good. His will can take what we see as weakness and turn it into strength. You have nothing to be ashamed of. What we're doing, it's God's will, just like it was for Lot and his family. Ava and Arya, too young to understand the full scope of what was happening, clung to the idea that their grandfather, their protector, must be right. They trusted him with their lives, and so, when he twisted scripture to fit his desires, they had no reason to question him. Slowly, over time, his words began to sink in, shaping their understanding of right and wrong. The line between spiritual guidance and manipulation became so blurred that they couldn't see the truth anymore, they only saw his version of it. The Bible, in the hands of a manipulator, became a cage. Pregnancy was not a miracle. It was a silence they couldn't break. Fear silenced their voices. The pastor, with his scripture and manipulation, convinced them that no one would believe them. And so they remained silent. Ava and Arya's lives became a constant cycle of fear and confusion. Each time they tried to speak up, they were told it was for the greater good, that no one would understand, that their lives would be ruined. Their grandfather's twisted version of faith left them paralyzed. Every day, their emotional struggle grew more intense. They felt completely isolated, afraid to break the silence for fear of the consequences. They no longer saw a way out, and their spirits slowly withered under the weight of their grandfather's control. Their friends began to notice the changes. Ava and Arya, once inseparable, stopped attending social gatherings, stopped texting back, stopped replying to phone calls. They withdrew further into themselves, into the suffocating grip of their grandfather's manipulation. At school, they would often come across as distant, their smiles forced and hollow. To the outside world, they seemed like just another set of twins growing up in a strict household, but the truth was far darker. No one knew the truth of their silent suffering. As their pregnancies progressed, so did their fear. They were terrified to speak, terrified to ask for help. The pastor's hold on them was suffocating. They were silent not by choice, but by design. Experts say that when victims of abuse are manipulated through religious doctrine, the psychological effects can be devastating. The confusion, the guilt, the belief that they are somehow complicit, it distorts their reality. Studies show that religious manipulation is particularly damaging because it causes victims to doubt not only their perceptions but also their sense of morality and self-worth. Ava and Arya were not just victims of their grandfather's physical actions, but of the emotional and spiritual control that he wielded so effectively. They were caught in a web of self-doubt, and in the absence of anyone to challenge their grandfather's power, they believed they had nowhere to turn. On June 6, 2024, the silence was shattered. The bodies of Ava and Arya Hale were found, discarded like trash, behind the church's van. What had seemed like a quiet church scandal was now the scene of a grisly double homicide. The investigators arrived at the scene, each of them knowing that this case was far more complicated than it first appeared. The community had seen Ava and Arya grow up, had watched them perform in the choir, and had seen them sitting with their grandfather at church services. No one, least of all the investigators, could fathom that the girls' tragic deaths had anything to do with the man they called a pillar of the community, Pastor Thomas Hale. But as the police began their work, it became clear that the death of the girls was no random act of violence. They meticulously combed through the scene for evidence, documenting every detail. The area behind the church van, once thought to be a quiet corner, now became the epicenter of a growing mystery. Forensic experts arrived, collecting DNA samples and fingerprint evidence from the van. Every piece of physical evidence was carefully catalogued. But the real breakthrough came when investigators turned to the digital trail left behind by the twins. As investigators began piecing the puzzle together, it became clear, this was no random act of violence. This was calculated, a betrayal that ran deep into the heart of the community. In his first police interview, Hale made a critical mistake. He referenced the location of the bodies, a detail that had not yet been released to the public. In that moment, the walls began to close in. As the investigation unfolded, forensic evidence began to mount against Hale. DNA samples found on the church van linked him directly to the crime scene. Further scrutiny of financial records revealed transfers of money that Hale had attempted to hide, suggesting a desperate attempt to cover up the crime. These actions, coupled with his slip-up in the interview, left no doubt in the investigators' minds. Pastor Hale's arrogance and misplaced confidence would ultimately be his downfall. The pastor's arrogance and misplaced confidence would be his undoing. The truth was unraveling fast, and Hale could no longer hide behind his pious image. As the case unfolded in court, it became clear, Pastor Thomas Hale was not just a preacher. He was a predator. The defense, however, tried to create doubt, claiming that Hale had suffered from mental instability and spiritual delusion. They argued that his actions were the result of a troubled mind, seeking to cast the pastor as a man who had lost touch with reality. But the jury was unconvinced. They saw through the defense's flimsy arguments, recognizing the coldness in Hale's actions. Hale's defense was flimsy, his claims of mental instability ignored the cold, calculated nature of his crimes. The jury saw through his lies, and he was convicted of murder, abuse of authority, and obstruction of justice. The community that once revered Hale was left in shock. The family, torn apart, had to confront the truth about the man they had trusted. The story of Ava and Arya Hale is a chilling reminder that evil can wear a collar and quote the Bible. It is a story of manipulation, betrayal, and a community forever changed. How far can faith go? And when does belief cross the line into madness? Pastor Hale's betrayal of his granddaughters shattered more than their lives. It shattered a community's trust in the very faith they thought they knew. Was justice truly served? Or is there more to this story? These questions linger, unanswered, leaving us with a stark reminder that not all evil wears an obvious mask. Sometimes, it hides behind the things we trust the most.
Welcome to Shocking True Crime. Thanks to all our viewers and subscribers for your support. Stay with us for daily updates on the most shocking true crime stories. Don't forget to subscribe.